There is a difference between a slow mind and a deep mind. A slow mind avoids effort. A deep mind explores everything. And sometimes, deep thinking looks strange before it looks smart. Intelligence rarely looks polished in real life. Highly active minds often look inefficient because they prioritize depth over appearance. A fast computer heats up. A powerful engine makes noise. In the same way, a brain that constantly connects patterns does not always look tidy or socially smooth. Many high-level cognitive habits look strange because they focus on understanding, not performance. Today we are breaking down 8 habits that look odd on the surface, but research in psychology and cognitive science suggests they often reflect deeper mental processing. Let's start with something that makes teachers and managers uncomfortable: the messy desk. Scattered notes, margins filled with arrows, ideas crossing over each other, a page that looks chaotic instead of clean. Most people assume disorder equals disorganization, but creativity research shows something more interesting. When the environment loosens structure, the brain often loosens structure too. In controlled experiments, researchers have found that mildly disorderly settings can increase divergent thinking, which is the ability to generate multiple novel solutions to a problem. When everything looks perfectly ordered, the brain tends to think in straight lines. When the environment looks flexible, the brain permits unconventional connections. The same logic applies to messy notes. Linear bullet points force information into a single path. However, associative thinkers rarely process information in straight lines. They build mental networks. One idea triggers another. A concept in the corner of the page links to something written earlier. Arrows and cross connections mirror how the brain stores knowledge, as clusters of related ideas, not as a neat outline. High pattern recognition brains prioritize connection over presentation. They focus on mapping relationships between ideas instead of polishing formatting. What looks like chaos often functions as a cognitive map. Structured chaos supports cross-linking, which strengthens recall and improves problem solving because the brain can approach the same issue from multiple angles. This does not mean clutter automatically makes someone intelligent. It means that for certain thinkers, external disorder reflects internal complexity. Their mind works like a web, not a checklist. But sometimes the mind does not just spread ideas across a desk, it spills them into the margins. During a long lecture or a boring meeting, you might see someone drawing shapes, sketching lines, or tracing patterns while listening. It looks like distraction, it looks like disengagement. In reality, the brain struggles when stimulation drops too low. When input fails to challenge the mind, attention drifts. The brain starts searching for novelty. Light motor activity, such as doodling, provides just enough stimulation to prevent cognitive shutdown. Studies have shown that simple drawing during low-engagement tasks can actually improve information retention compared to sitting still and forcing attention. Doodling occupies a small portion of working memory. That tiny activity prevents the brain from slipping into full daydream mode. Instead of disengaging completely, the mind stays anchored. Think of it as keeping the engine idling instead of turning it off. Smart brains resist passive intake. They prefer active engagement. When the environment does not provide enough stimulation, they create their own. That small act of drawing keeps the attention system online. It protects against mental drift and supports deeper encoding of information. And when the mind refuses to drift, it does not stop at drawing lines, it starts questioning. Why? But what about this? How do we know that is true? Some people call it annoying, others call it overthinking. In classrooms and meetings, the person who keeps raising their hand often disrupts the flow. They slow things down, they push past the surface answer. They want one more layer. Curiosity does more than satisfy interest. Research in cognitive psychology shows that curiosity increases information encoding. When the brain feels a gap in knowledge, it shifts into a heightened learning state. Dopamine activity rises, attention sharpens, memory pathways strengthen. The question itself primes the brain to remember the answer. Active questioning forces deeper processing. When you ask, "How do we know?" you move from memorizing facts to examining evidence. When you ask why, you look for mechanism instead of outcome. That shift transforms passive listening into active construction. The brain links new information to prior knowledge, which improves long-term retention and flexible thinking. Studies on need for cognition, which describes the tendency to enjoy effortful thinking, show overlap with higher reasoning ability. People who naturally seek complexity tend to analyze arguments more carefully. They prefer depth over speed. They tolerate mental effort because their brain treats it as stimulation rather than strain. Intelligent minds do not feel satisfied with surface explanations. They want structure. They want causality. They want to understand how parts connect. Ambiguity feels incomplete. Instead of avoiding uncertainty, they move toward it and try to unpack it. That constant drive to explore does not switch off easily. And sometimes that exploration does not stop at 5 p.m. You might notice it at night. The room goes quiet, notifications stop, conversations fade, and suddenly the mind becomes louder, ideas spiral, old conversations replay, new concepts form. Some people feel most mentally alive after midnight. They struggle to shut off their thoughts. While others fall asleep easily, they continue refining plans and analyzing possibilities. Research on chronotypes suggests that some individuals naturally function better later in the day. Evening-oriented thinkers often report higher alertness during late hours. Night reduces external interruption. Fewer messages arrive. Fewer demands compete for attention. That quiet environment creates space for reflective processing. Creative cognition often benefits from reduced social interference. During the day, the brain reacts. At night, it reflects. With fewer inputs, internal networks activate more strongly. The default mode network, which supports imagination and internal simulation, becomes more engaged. The mind connects distant ideas. It replays scenarios. It reorganizes information. High mental stimulation makes shutdown difficult. A brain that constantly generates patterns does not power down on command. It replays ideas not because it wants stress, but because it seeks refinement. It runs simulations. It tests possibilities. It adjusts small details. However, thinking deeply does not always look like immediate action. Some people do not start right away. They receive a task and pause. They let the idea sit. From the outside, it looks like delay. It looks like avoidance. Yet research on the incubation effect shows that stepping away from a problem can improve problem solving. When you stop consciously working on a task, the brain does not fully stop processing it. Subconscious systems continue scanning connections. They reorganize information in the background. Moderate procrastination differs from panic-driven delay. Strategic delay allows ideas to mature. Studies on creativity suggest that moderate postponement can increase originality because the mind explores alternative pathways before committing. Immediate execution can lock you into the first available solution. A short delay can expand the option space. High-level thinkers often simulate outcomes internally before acting externally. They test ideas mentally. They anticipate obstacles. They refine strategy before execution. What looks like inaction may actually be internal optimization. Of course, extreme procrastination harms performance. But moderate delay, when paired with eventual focused effort, can enhance quality. The key lies in intention. Strategic delay allows subconscious processing. Avoidance avoids responsibility. The difference shows in the outcome, and when they finally return to the problem after letting it evolve quietly in the background, they often explain it out loud. You might catch them talking to themselves. They walk through the logic step by step. They pretend to teach an invisible audience. Sometimes they even explain the problem to an object on their desk, as if it could answer back. It looks strange from the outside, but it serves a powerful cognitive function. When you verbalize a thought, you force it into structure. Vague ideas cannot survive full sentences. The moment you try to explain something clearly, your brain must organize it logically. You must define terms. You must connect steps. You must remove contradictions. Verbalization turns abstract intuition into structured reasoning. Research on learning consistently shows that teaching improves understanding. When people prepare to explain material to someone else, they process it more deeply. They organize information into coherent chunks. They anticipate confusion. They refine explanations. Even the act of explaining to no one in particular activates the same cognitive benefits. Articulation also exposes knowledge gaps. When you try to say something clearly and stumble, your brain receives immediate feedback. You realize where your understanding feels thin. Silent thinking can hide confusion. Speaking reveals it. That friction sharpens clarity. Smart brains often refine through articulation. They do not trust that a thought is solid until they can express it simply. External speech acts like a mirror for internal complexity. It compresses scattered ideas into a clean sequence. What feels tangled in the mind often untangles through explanation. But sometimes the mind needs silence instead of sound. Not stimulation, not speech, not even music. Some people sit alone without a phone in their hand. They stare at nothing in particular. No scrolling, no background noise, no podcast filling the space. Many people find that uncomfortable. Silence feels empty. But for a highly active mind, silence provides room. When external input drops, the brain shifts inward. Neuroscientists refer to a network called the default mode network, which becomes more active during rest and quiet wakefulness. This network supports internal simulation, memory integration, and future planning. In simple terms, it helps the brain reorganize information. Solitude without stimulation allows creative recombination. Ideas that seemed unrelated during active work begin to link. Memories resurface. Patterns become clearer. The brain consolidates consolidates learning. It integrates fragments into larger structures. Constant input prevents this process. When attention stays locked on screens, the mind never gets a chance to reorganize. High cognitive processing requires decompression space. Just as muscles grow during recovery, complex thinking strengthens during quiet consolidation. Alone time does not mean isolation. It means giving the brain permission to reorder its internal data. Silence becomes productive because it supports mental restructuring. And interestingly, changing locations can do the same thing. You move from your desk to the couch, you step into the shower, you take a walk while thinking through a problem. Suddenly, a solution appears that refused to surface before. Physical movement influences cognition more than most people realize. Studies show that walking can increase divergent thinking, which means generating multiple possible ideas. Movement alters blood flow, sensory input, and neural activation patterns. A small shift in environment nudges the brain out of rigid loops. Context shapes thought. When you remain in the same physical space, your brain associates that space with specific patterns of thinking. Changing location interrupts that pattern. It disrupts cognitive fixation. A shower, a hallway, or a short walk introduces mild novelty, which enhances cognitive flexibility. Smart brains often recognize when they feel stuck. Instead of forcing the same mental route repeatedly, they adjust the environment. They manipulate context to change state. They understand, sometimes instinctively, that thinking does not happen only in the head. It happens in interaction with surroundings. A small shift in space can unlock a large shift in perspective. And that brings us to something important. Many of these habits look unproductive on the surface. Talking alone, sitting quietly, walking around, waiting before starting. Yet beneath those behaviors, the brain runs complex processes that support depth, clarity, and creativity. What looks strange often signals a mind that refuses to think in straight lines. When you look at these habits together, a pattern starts to form. None of them look impressive on the surface. A messy desk does not look intelligent. Talking to yourself does not look sophisticated. Sitting alone in silence does not look productive. Delaying a task does not look disciplined. But intelligence rarely advertises itself through neat behavior. It shows up in how the brain processes information. It shows up in how deeply someone thinks, how often they refine ideas, and how much mental simulation happens beneath the surface. Highly active minds often look inefficient because they prioritize understanding over speed. They replay ideas, they reorganize thoughts, they question assumptions, they change environments to shift perspective. They give their brain time to incubate instead of forcing immediate output. Of course, none of these habits guarantee intelligence. Anyone can have a messy desk. Anyone can stay up late. Context matters. Balance matters. Sleep still matters. Discipline still matters. But if you recognize yourself in several of these behaviors, it may not mean you are distracted or strange. It may mean your brain processes information in layered, non-linear ways that do not always fit social expectations.